All right. So if you're ready to go, Chet.
Absolutely am.
All right. So I'll count us down and we will go in 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Jeff Frick here, coming to you for another episode of Work 20XX, and I'm excited to have this next guest. He's an industry veteran. I think he's been around this business in this valley as long as I have, and we're kind of a rare breed to find these days, so I'm excited to welcome in. He's Chet Kapoor, the chairman and CEO of DataStax. Chet, great to see you today.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So before we jump in, chairman and CEO of DataStax, give everyone kind of the 101 on what DataStax is all about.
DataStax started about 14 years ago with data at scale, right? If you think about all the different apps you use, Spotify, Apple, Netflix, ordering Starbucks, ordering a phone from Verizon, getting a FedEx package, they all use technology that DataStax helped create. So anything that was data at scale, that's what they did. Now think about 2 years ago, in comes this thing called ChatGPT. And guess what happens? There is no AI without data. There is no AI without data at scale. We do data at scale. So DataStax is the company to do GenAI apps because we make it easier for people to develop GenAI apps. We make them more relevant, and we obviously scale them like crazy. So that's what DataStax does.
All right, great. And we're going to get deep into the whole AI conversation. But before we go there, I want to get a little bit technical. Tell me a little bit about what is a vector database? How is that different? DataStax was famous for Cassandra back in the day. Oracle was the first one with the relational databases back in the day. What is different about a vector database, and how is that really an enabling technology that we couldn't do before?
So the thing that GenAI needs, so if you think about LLMs, right? So large language models, they need to know the proximity of information. So Jeff's been in the Bay Area for 30 years. Chet's been in the Bay Area for 30 years. They need the proximity of both of us being in the Bay Area, not just Jeff's record and Chet's record. Right. And so they don't, and it may not be zip codes, but so what you do is you encode my information into an XY axis, and we take your information into a number, XY axis, and actually put them together. So when we search for the area, we get proximity of Jeff and Chet being in the Bay Area together. So what vectors are is a great way for things to relate to each other, right? And there are numerical representations of what is available to large language models so that they can actually go and use that information to make it happen. So language models actually need vectors to go off and make it happen. They use it themselves, but that's also how you interact with them to create more relevant applications. So if you think about all the data you have, let's just take FedEx, all my packages being tracked forever. Now it is there. But I need to vectorize them so that I can actually work with the LLMs to create more relevant applications going forward.
It is just a faster way to draw the relationships, or a faster way to connect the relationships?
It is a different way that makes it faster for large language models to use the information.
Okay. So then let's talk about your pivot to GenAI and supporting GenAI. What did you see specifically, and what was really involved in this pivot and kind of reprioritizing around this hot new thing that hit the scene a couple of Novembers ago?
So we started tracking ChatGPT very closely. And, a bunch of us from Google, so we knew about foundational models happening. So we've been tracking it for a while. And then we really saw ChatGPT come in November of 22. And we started talking about the all hands. A bunch of us started talking about it at the dinner table. It became a part of how it was going to change the world. And so we're geeks, we're technologists. So we wanted to start talking about it. And it was very clear by about January or February that we had to do something about taking all the data that we store, right? All these terabytes, petabytes of data that we have. How do we vectorize that so that you can make more relevant GenAI apps happen? So the first thing we did was we went and created some open source technology called JVector, which basically takes information as it is coming in, vectorizes it, indexes it, and stores it so that you can use it right away. So that's the first thing that we did. So we basically created the first, what people would call a hybrid vector database. That means it actually serves as a regular database, but it's also a vector database all in one. So, and it is the most scalable one in the industry. And we did that in, I would say, June of 23. Now, the moment we did that, we realized that that was not going to be good enough. If you think about every stack, right? This is my fifth wave: client server, web, mobile, cloud, and now GenAI. Every time there's a new wave, there's a new stack that developers use to build applications. Databases are part of them. So we started with a vector database and we delivered that to the market. But it was very clear that it was the wild, wild west, and people had not figured out how to build apps to go and make this happen. And so we said we're going to go up the stack and not just have a greatly optimized vector database, but actually go up the stack and give developers an opinionated view from open source technologies on how they should build apps. And we've been on that journey. We started about in August of 23. And now 1 year, you fast forward, it is amazing. We're delivering an AI PaaS, which is a platform as a service. We have a visual editor. We have a bunch of ways to ingest data. We're using a bunch of technologies from NVIDIA for embedding services. So we're making it like at least 10x faster and more agile for developers to deliver relevant applications at scale.
So you've been on a little bit of a roadshow, on your RAG roadshow, yes, which I was happy to attend, the one up in San Francisco. I think you were most recently in New York. So, you know, when ChatGPT launched, and then I think the first OpenAI developer conference, they talked about, you know, have your own ChatGPT, you know, put in your own data, customize it your own way. Well, you know, that's not really training it. RAG is a real way to train it and you know, kind of put in your own data, make it relevant. So tell us a little bit about the RAG adventure, and it's one step closer to this vision of citizen developers. You know, it's not quite there yet. I watched. I'm like, don't think I'm quite ready to write that demo Netflix app that you had, but it's getting closer every day.
This is it's a great question. So the first thing is, LLMs do really well, and they'll always have a great spot for us. And you can talk about how OpenAI was going after the search market and going after advertisers. All that stuff is for the consumer market. Now, if you think about you and I, and we think about this, right? You use an AI agent today. What's the AI agent called? It's called Google Maps, right? It's not like we're new to this. We've been using AI agents for quite some time. How does an AI agent perform? How do you agentify something? You take all this information you have about maps. I'm going to give you an example. All this information about maps and things like that. And then you need to take all the information about me, which is, what does Chet like? What kind of food does he want to do when he travels? Does he actually have in the Bay Area, does he have a sticker? Can he use a carpool lane? Things like that, right? All that is information that's stored with me. You are not going to give that to the LLM because that's personal information. It's PII information, right? So now when I'm going to create an app like Google Maps, I'm going to take all this information about maps and freeways and roads and all that stuff. And then I'm going to take all this information I have available for Chat. And I need to combine these two to make it relevant so I can serve a relevant experience to Chat. Right? And the mechanism to do that is retrieval augmented generation. That's what RAG is. RAG is taking everything that the LLM gives you, everything that Chet has about him, combining it so that we can deliver the most relevant experience for Chet on a personal basis to make that happen. Whether you're doing it through a chatbot, you're doing it through personalization or whatever else it might be. RAG is the best technique so far. There'll be other techniques that come up as well. But that's the best technique, and we've jumped on it, and so has the industry. Right. And the open source ecosystem is phenomenal. It's growing really, really well, which is great, right? We have a saying at DataStax: if it's not being done in open source, it's probably not worth doing.
Right.
That's how fast things are going. So we have this thing about RAG, and it is going exceedingly well now and taking off. And so we had this conference that you were in San Francisco. That was great. You should have been in New York. That was just 2 weeks ago. We had standing room only, over 500 people there. And it was really interesting. You generally, a company like us, you know, goes and says you want a bunch of folks to come over. 90% of the people in the room were not our customers.
That's great.
We had NVIDIA on the stage. It was a great time.
It was standing room only in San Francisco. I was in the back helping the catering people because they were tripping over me every time they came in and out from the back. So you had a full house.
It was great. And
no doubt about it.
And we're doing one in London next week.
Yeah. So, you talk a lot about reminding everybody that we're still in the early days. And I think one of your fun examples, you talk about early mobile. Everyone wanted to program Angry Birds. I think I pulled up an original or early Yahoo webpage the other day to highlight to people, we're just getting barely started in this thing. And if you look at where web apps are now, compared to Angry Birds and everything is on our phone, this thing is hardly getting started. So let's talk about adoption and people being afraid of it and how people should learn to use it, especially in the context of an assistant. That's the one we talk about every day.
So we think that 2024 is the year of production AI. A lot of people found when we said this in February, people were like, no, it was like very controversial. Now you show up in the middle of September and you realize that what you're doing here is that every enterprise that we know of, right, 800 plus customers doing lots of different things, everyone will put one app in production this year. It may be a small one, it may be just internal, but they'll put something. So I think 2024 is going to be the year of production. 2025 is when it gets interesting. That's when we have what we call transformative AI use cases, where people start saying, I think I really like this travel agent or the assistant I have and a bot and things like that. But now I'm trying to change my business model and try to experiment with different things. So I believe 2024 is the year where people put static websites on mobile apps, right? They basically had stuff already on the web and all they did was make it available in mobile. And that's what I call the Angry Bird stage, right? You're just doing some things that are simple, but they're unique because the form factor changes and things like that. But next year and the year after, it gets really, really, really awesomely interesting because we have not seen the Amazons of GenAI yet. We've not seen the Netflixes of GenAI yet. They're still yet to come. We've not seen companies like Walmart who've reinvented themselves around GenAI yet. I think all of that happens in 25, 26, 27. But the one thing that's different, this time around, it'll go faster. It'll go much faster. And the reason is because this technology is more human-like than anything that we have ever seen in the last 500 years, right? Or forever in just the history of humankind. We have never seen technology that is more, think about the steam engine, right? It's not human-like, but it changed our lives forever, right? But this thing is like more human-like than anything else.
I wish we had 6 hours, but we don't, but we'll keep going. So on the app side, what percentage of the apps do you think are going to be standalone apps that somebody engages with versus AI influences within other apps? Because it seems like that's really where the giant impact is. Because as you said, it's going to be a part of the way everything works in software.
I think yes and yes. I think the answer, so let's take the first thing. Every app will have GenAI features, no doubt about it. But I think people will rewrite those apps to be generative AI apps. And by the way, this is how technology works, right? If you think about cloud, let's take a different one than mobile. What did customers do in the beginning of cloud? Lift and shift. It's the same app, shut down my data center and let me go and just run it on AWS. That's what the use case was. And then they realized, we got to rebuild the application to take advantage of everything that the cloud does. And so that'll be the natural progression. People will just say, hey, I have a website. Priceline's a good example. I have a website. I'm going to go and put Penny. Instead of just having a regular chatbot, I'll have a generative AI chatbot so Chet can get relevant information about his travel plans.
Right.
That's all good. But how do we change the experience of how Chet does? He's still coming to a webpage. And so people like Priceline are going to start figuring out what is the next, what does GenAI give me where I can change the experience for Chet, right? And be more proactive in making it happen.
Right. On the human-centric side, which is such a good point, and I actually think the most underreported aspect of this whole thing is the fact that, as you said, I now have access to a supercomputer first of all,
Yeah.
and I can talk to it. And the
Yeah.
fact that it's trained on text and literature and all these people generated content databases actually makes it a really good conversational assistant and really understands the way people talk and the way people can communicate. And I think that the fact that you've got that at your fingertips all the time, you can ask it any question and it comes right back and helps you sort things out. I think that is way underappreciated because we finally have conversational interface with a computer.
I would agree 100%. I've been wanting, so if you really think about it, UI has not changed since what Park did and what Steve Jobs took from Park and said, we're going to go and do it on the Mac, right? The GUI interface. And now instead of a mouse, you use your fingers on a phone and things like that, which is great. Lots of good progress. You can see everything going in the right direction, but it's not significantly changed. It's like, saying the steering wheel has been on the right or the left and generally in the same place since the cars came into being, since cars were invented. They're not significant change there. I think conversational interfaces will change the game significantly in a massive way. I think that is awesome. LLMs can do that. You can do that with, by the way, ChatGPT wouldn't have gone to a billion people without a conversational piece into it, right? It went faster than any other technology in our past.
Right.
What I'm really looking forward to, though, is I want the technology to think for me.
Right.
I want it not just to think for everybody. I don't want it to homogenize it. I want it to actually be specific to me. So I love the interface piece that you mentioned, but I want it to be next level because I process my email differently than you do. Right. And by the way, my leadership team processes emails differently than I do. And I want the agent, the email agent, to be my email agent. I want it to do it the way I think, and I want it to be specific to me. That's what I'm looking forward to. I want to train agents for me.
Right. All right. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about work, because this is Work 20XX and in the context of work. And people have a hard time adopting it. It's still surprising how many people have not tried it out. And I try to tell people, think of it as a calculator. It's a tool that you need to use. You need to get comfortable using it. The difficulty is at this stage in time with hallucinations is I don't double check the work of the calculator when I do a square root. And what I find really interesting in hallucinations is if it's a topic that you're aware of and you're knowledgeable about, you can pick out the hallucinations. And more importantly, you can identify whether it's important or not. But the problem is if you do like 10 queries in a row about something you know about, and then you do something that you don't know about, it's a lot harder to pick up the hallucinations. How do you think that people should think about incorporating this tool into their life? Because today, what I would love for it to do that it doesn't do is tell me what I should be working on right now. What's the highest leverage activity that I should be doing today based on my calendar, based on my email, based on all these other things. And it's still not doing that. It's still coming back from queries, but it's not really taking the lead and helping me be more efficient with my time.
This is a year and a half old.
Right. Angry Birds.
For a lot of people, don't forget that in the early days of Google or Yahoo or everything you had, search queries were not accurate. In fact, they were not very good. You could actually go and say, I did this, and you got a different result. This is just technology. It'll mature, right? In all different ways. It'll mature with relevancy. It'll mature with governance. It'll mature with security. It'll happen across. The number of people and the amount of capital being invested is obscene, right? I mean, it is absolutely will get better, and it'll get better faster than most people think.
Right. So you've talked about this thing, the productivity paradox. And as we're recording this, Cisco just announced another round of layoffs. They've had a couple this year. Amazon just announced their 5 days a week back in the office, return to office, which I thought was kind of interesting. Some people think that might be just kind of a soft layoff that nobody's talking about. But there is this idea where, can you substitute the increases in productivity based on this tool with less people? Or should you really be thinking about it as a way to get more out of the resources and the people that you have? Because this is an increasingly accelerating and competitive world. It seems like it really should be the latter.
So, great question. Something that we think a lot about, right? So, we think every enterprise will fall in one of three categories: delegate, accelerate, and reinvent or invent. The people in the delegate category are looking for efficiency. And what they're going to say is, I want to be 30% more efficient. And I'm picking 30%, could be 20, could be 40, but a 30% more efficient, and they will do layoffs. Just the way it goes. Accelerate will be people who say, I want to be 30% more effective. Yes, I'll take the efficiency gains, but I want to be 30% more effective. And those people are starting to go and change the game. And they're going to go off and say, I'm going to accelerate. I'm not just going to delegate down and say, give me bottom line results, but I want to actually start thinking about being more effective. And so I can actually increase my top line and go from there. The really fun stuff happens when people say they want to reinvent themselves and they want to be 300% better. Not 30%, 300% better. When they think they take the model, they don't say, I am better with GenAI. They flip the model and say, I have GenAI, let me see how it would structure a company. And that's what Amazon did, right? Amazon reinvented what Walmart was doing because they said it's the web, right? So we should think about everything differently because we have no legacy. We have what I call a blank sheet of paper, and you can do whatever you want with it, right? So those are the three categories. I think you will find companies to actually go through those phases, right? There'll be companies that go through delegate and go to accelerate. They're not going to stay stagnant. There'll be some companies that just stay in delegate because they're a regulated industry and they do not have the imagination, or they don't have the income statement to make that happen. They don't have a balance sheet to make that happen. So you'll find different people. But what's really encouraging is people like JP Morgan, largest bank in the world, have come back and said, we want to talk about not just efficiency, but effectiveness.
Right.
Right. And that is extremely encouraging. Right. Now, does that mean they won't do layoffs? No, it means that they will probably do layoffs as well. But the good news is they're looking at this as top line growth, not just bottom line growth. So this point that a lot of people don't realize is that you may not, let's try to simplify this. I have 100 people in the company. I get to be 30% more effective. I have a choice. I can take the 100 people and make it 70, or I can leave the 100 people and just become 25% more effective on the top line. And that is the decision that CEOs and boards have to make. I think most of them will realize that they're going to come into the accelerate category, then stay in the delegate category. Right. But so they will not, I think over time people realize they're not going to do layoffs. Now the models might change, they might do some, but I think they'll realize that this is a mode for them to become not just efficient, but also become more effective.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because that so parallels the cloud story exactly, where people first thought about it as efficiency gain, and then the smart people looked at it as an effectiveness game to change the model. I just had that conversation with Julie Whalen from CBRE, even trying to get real estate people to start think about from efficiency, how many butts per floor, how many cubes per floor, et cetera, into effectiveness. How are we helping people to deliver better results for the company? And it's such a different way to really think about the world.
I'll make it really simple. We run the company on a weekly basis. We have a 40-page thing that we do that gives us stats and data and knobs or metrics about across the company. What we do is we take everything that comes up for a week, we actually go and send it to an LLM that we've trained. And it gives us stats all over the place. And it goes trending patterns and stuff like that. Now, that work was being done by somebody for about 10 or 12 hours a week. Now we actually just wait for 5 minutes and get a result back. Right. What do we do with that person's 12 hours? We make them do other things. Right. And that's how, if you simplify it to a task, it makes a difference.
Right. All right, well, I'm going to take you back in the hot tub time machine here. We're going to go back to your early days, and you actually read books back when people still read books, and
Still
you've
do.
talked
Still
about
do.
the two big books that really had a big influence on you. Mike Moritz's The Little Kingdom, talking about Apple and the excitement around the development of Apple, and the other one that I was amazed you brought up. I actually read it, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, which is really the story of open source, and I think the open source, and it's kind of like the Moore's law. There's the actual thing, and then there's the concept and really the spirit behind it that I think is so powerful. Like in Moore's law, open source, I think, is one of the most amazing contributions to the world in terms of this ethos. And I had Martina Lachenko on. She's at Costa No, and she talked about when she was at Microsoft back in the day working on Word. She goes, you were stuck with the product you shipped in the shrink wrap for 3 years. So you better be happy with the features because you can't touch it.
Yeah.
I mean, the open source changed everything so much. You just talked about the cadence at which you run your company. And you also talked about, having lots of eyes and using the accelerated development pace that open source provides. I wonder if you can share a little bit more. You've been in the business for a long time. You've seen kind of both sides of the equation. What is really the power of open source that has really transformed things?
I'll start by saying, I think I said this earlier, in 2024, if it's not being done in open source, it's probably not worth doing. That's how, and as a startup person, that's how I think about it, right? Now, you may choose to have a different monetization model. You may do 100 lines of code, and you may only want to open source 80 lines of code. We are not believers in that, but a lot of people do that, and they have premium, freemium models and things like that. But if it's not being done in open source, it's probably not worth doing. Open source is single-handedly the best way to get innovation in the early days of a project. It's the best way to get diversity. It's the best way to get transparency. There's no hiding behind anything. Everybody sees everything. It's the best way to have meritocracy because it doesn't matter what school you went to or what company you work for. Your code does the talking. Imagine those 4 things in companies and how our social structures make it so hard to make that happen. We have this beautiful thing called OSS, or open source software, that lets you go off and make it happen. I am a firm believer, right, in that you have to figure out a way to make it happen. Now, the one thing I'll tell you, and the reason I said early days of a project, open source is very different when you're starting out versus when you're mature. So Linux was very different when we started out, or even Apache Cassandra, the project that we're involved in, very different in the first 7 years with Linux, the first 15 years, and very different now. Because now you make a small change that is wrong and you have a CloudStrike thing happening because everything runs on it. So you've got to be really careful. In the early days, you're putting features in on a regular basis. So projects change and they morph. So what lands up happening, the reason I bring this up is because this is where the cathedral and the bazaar comes in, right? Which is the 4 things I talked about are very hard to implement in the cathedral. And so for the early days, you just go and do it in the bazaar. It's the way to do it because you get diversity, transparency, innovation, just great, and meritocracy. But as time goes on and things get more mature, people are not going to start working on really cool features. The vector, our JVector product, was not something we did in open source. We actually did it in the cathedral, just for the record. We did it ourselves. But the moment we finished it, we dropped it into the bazaar and said, please, people who want to use it can go off and do it. But people were not getting up in the morning thinking that they wanted vectorization of a Cassandra database.
Right.
But OSS just rocks in so many different ways, right? And I think anybody that doesn't implement it, they should do it. They just have a blind spot. Right.
So different topic. You might not smile quite so big, but hopefully you'll smile a little bit. And that's governance and law of unintended consequences. And there's a couple of things I want to throw out before and have you react. One is Dr. Ruman Chowdhury used to be the head of ethics at Accenture. Her great line is, good brakes allow us to go faster, which when I heard that, I was like, wow, that is just genius. Yeah. And And then you look at what's happening, say, in privacy as a proxy for our ability to regulate. And because of our system with states and the feds, it's really hard to get a consistent rule, even for something like breach notification. And you compare that with, say, GDPR in Europe as a way to pull this about. And then the last thing is, the law of unintended consequences, which we've seen a little bit on the social media side, where, unfortunately, to get more clicks, it turns out more extreme content gets more clicks. And you've got kind of these things that weren't necessarily set out that way, but it happens. As we look at the power of this technology and where it's going to be, and, there's always the pushback. We don't want to govern too much. We don't want to kill innovation. But, unfortunately, things left unfettered don't necessarily always turn out the way we wish. What's kind of your take as we're getting enough traction where this is becoming more and more of a topic of conversation? In fact, I think Newsom just signed some paper sitting next to Benioff up at Salesforce the other day.
Yeah. So I'll start with first my biases. I'm a geek. I like innovating stuff. I like building great products that change people's lives. That's the essence of what I like doing, right? And obviously building businesses around it. But it starts from building a product that changes somebody's lives. And I don't want anybody coming between me and the product and the person who uses it. Nothing. Because that's how innovation happens. It's really hard, right? It's not meant to be, right? And changing user behavior is really, really hard. So what I want to do is I want to build a product and I want the product to interact with the user. And that's the only thing I care about. That's my bias. Having said that, for all technology waves until this one, I would have said, don't worry about governance and regulators and all that. But this one, because of what we talked about earlier, this being more human-like than anything else, I think I'm really glad that we actually are getting people involved. Now, the problem is when you get this, when, minds are mature, I build a product, and markets and governments are not, because they have many minds involved. That's just the nature of how things happen. And so what is going to happen here is we're going to do it wrong, right? There's not a single technology wave. There's not a single technology wave in our entire history that has not had it has had bad consequences. Every technology, unintended consequences happen with every technology. There's a flip side. It's two sides to a coin. It will happen with GenAI. You can put all the regulation you want and it'll still happen with GenAI, right? It doesn't matter. So I think the regulators being involved now is great. We are not going to get it right. But the fact that we are working on it, my just request would be the people who work on this should be people who understand the technology a little bit.
Right.
They should not be, that is my one thing that I want. I want any policymaker who's involved in this to take the time to understand the technology and the basics of it. They don't have to become programmers or things like that, but they should actually be well-versed rather than just say it's wrong without understanding it. Right. Because the technology is moving very fast, and please don't forget, we're in the Angry Birds part.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, hopefully it's not senators that still have their emails printed for them, right, and handed to them on a piece of paper.
That's my point. That is my point.
Yeah. But I just was fortunate. Ray Kurzweil just came out with his new book, The Singularity is Nearer, and he was speaking at one of the local bookstores. It was very cool to see, and there's a lot of really interesting concepts. I also interviewed Jack Niles, the grandfather of telecommuting, who did the first research in 1973 when the fastest bandwidth you could get was a T1, which I think was 1.4 megs on a good day, according to my friends in the business. So exponential curves. I want to talk a little bit about exponential curves. Just to take you back, I had to look it up. The Cray supercomputer in 1976 cost equivalent dollars today of $36 million. It had 8 megs of RAM, not gigs. It could do 80 million floating point operations compared to a modern smartphone can do 500 billion. So you can't even try to figure out orders of magnitude. I tried to figure it out for the bandwidth. How do you compare 5G to 1.4 megs? I struggled to ChatGPT, and it said, okay, how about compared to a garden hose? If a garden hose is 1.4 megs, how much water do you need to have 5G? And it was like 50 fire hoses, bigger, faster, stronger. So when you think of what's possible in the not too distant future, you said this is going to go faster than anything before. Where do you see things like small language models? Where do you see things like local language models running on your laptop, or even more on your phone, as these exponential curves on the technology side continue to ramp? And how do you run a business in the world of exponential curves as these things get faster and faster and faster?
It's a great question. Something I think about quite a bit, right? So I'll give you two perspectives. I think I'll give you a consumer perspective and I'll give you an enterprise perspective. From a consumer perspective, small language models, the teacher model, it's done. It's going to happen, right? I want my language model. I want my small language model that is disconnected from anything that's happening with a large language model. This is mine. And by the way, then I would want one for DataStax. Then I would want one for DataStax and marketing, and on and on and on. So that part is done. I think it is going to happen because something, and I just to be clear, I don't want, like we talked about, I process email differently than somebody else does in our same company. And I want to make sure that they have their own small language model, because it might start with email, but it could go to calendaring as an example. It could be, how do you create content? How you process content? What do I look for in content versus somebody else? So that ship has sailed. People will figure out a way to do it. And if I want it available on this. I want it available on this, by the way, not my phone. That's actually an easy one. I want it available everywhere.
Right.
I want it available in my glasses I wear. Right. So small language models are going to show up everywhere, no matter where you go. Right. It'll show up in everything we do. And that is awesome, because it is all about me. Right. And I don't mean that in an egocentric way, but it's about, how does this change my behavior, then changes a functional behavior, then changes a company behavior, then an industry behavior, then a country's behavior, and then civilization's behavior, right? But I think it needs to zoom in and out through all of that. So we're going to find some crazy, awesome stuff happen that along this, where you have agentification making it happen. So I think that's one part. On the enterprise piece, a little harder. 90% of the IT budget in enterprises is about running systems. 10% is on innovation. This AI stuff ain't cheap. And so it's going to create a crunch on their IT budgets. And you're not going to go from a $5 billion budget to a $10 billion budget. You may increase it to 5.5, 5.7, and that's not going to be good enough for you to reinvent yourself. Now, if you're in the delegate phase, fine, but you won't be able to read. So it's going to change how enterprises spend time on technology. And the best example is the same thing happened with web, same thing happened with cloud, right? But they were replacements. There's no replacement here. You're actually going to gut out your system and make it happen. And so the enterprise IT function is going to go through a bunch of changes in the next 4 or 5 years, because it is going to create this structural problem where they have to continue to run what they already have, but while they're running it, they need to completely reinvent themselves in an app to go off and make it happen. And that is going to be a problem. It's going to create tension on how much money you spend on services, how much money you spend on software, how much you spend on LLMs, on small language models, on databases, all those kinds of things. And we think it's long overdue.
Right.
That structure has not changed, at least for the 34 years I've been doing this.
Yeah. Well, and it's not going to be expensive for long, right? It's not going to be expensive for long. That same example, the T1, I think, cost $8,000 a month in today's dollars.
Correct.
For a T1 compared to what you pay for your phone. So
very much.
Kind of piggybacking on that, a couple of years ago, I did some stuff with GE, and there was a lot of talk about digital twins. Digital twins for modeling behavior, so you could do different types of tests, and you could do lots of stuff without actually, say, putting a jet engine through a sandstorm to find out how it's going to act. So a lot of talk about digital twins and a lot of good things about it. What's really crazy when you start talking about what you're doing now in RAG and training, you just talked about the way you do email versus the way I do email. When you think about digital twins, and digital twins not for jet engines, but digital twin of Chet. And like you said, it might be a couple digital twins, the one that goes to work and then the one that stays at home and plays with the
And
family.
does
How do you
and does
think about
laundry and does
it?
laundry.
That's a whole different one. But that's actually, that could be your next $1 billion idea right there. The digital
Yeah.
twin does laundry. But as you think about digital twins and how that's going to change the way, there's talk of, my twin's going to go attend meetings for me. There's so many different ways that you can, it's kind of mind bending to think of what you would do with a digital twin, scenario planning for health. There's so many vectors in which this is applicable. Pretty interesting possibilities.
I'll be controversial. I think there'll be variations of what people call the digital twin. My perspective on this, and we talk about job loss and things like that, this is not about me versus AI. This is not humans versus AI. This is about humans versus humans with AI. And what I mean by humans with AI or people with AI is I'm going to have a bunch of things helping me, but I am still the center of everything. And the agents or the digital twins will never be able to do what I do, because judgment will still be mine for quite a long time to come. Quite a long time to come, right? Otherwise the agent has to learn my childhood issues, right? And that is going to be hard. And so my point is I behave a certain way because I am thinking about what I want to be, what I used to be, and what I am, right? And that's kind of hard for an agent to pick up, no matter how much they go and search the web and say, Chet was born and brought up in Calcutta and he came here because of the Steve Jobs book or whatever else it might be. The nuances are only known to me, right? And so my take is, I think digital twins, there'll be variations of it, just like every other technology, right? We reach, and we land up, we reach for the moon and we land on the trees, right? We've been talking about self-driving cars for a long time. They were going to be ready 4 or 5 years ago. They're now coming into being, right? And we're still not ready to roll them out. So I think there's a part of this that we just have to realize, but I am really looking forward to a bunch of different agents that are very specialized for me, like you said, for laundry, for hanging out with the family, helps me out. Like, for example, I would love to know what my daughter's schedule is today, right? And instead of going and looking at it, I would say, what, can I spend time with her between 4 and 6? Because I think I'm going to go home early and find out. Instead of clicking 16 places, looking at her calendar, looking at my calendar, that would be an easy thing for somebody to get done.
Right.
And then say in aggregate, did I spend 14 hours with her or 10 hours with her or 6 hours with her this week? How do we make sure we spend 10 hours with her next week? And I say we, meaning me and my agent, we.
Right. Well, and the other thing too, just what is the time? And you talked about self-driving cars have been on the horizon for a while. They're just getting here, but was that a long time or a short time? In many ways, it feels very, very short, which is what we're kind of getting to the end of our time. So I want to give you the last word. You've been through a lot, as you said, 5 different waves. Back in the day when people's main function was really being an API between applications, we took data from one piece of paper and keyed it into another piece of paper. What are some of the things you're excited? I know you're excited about this next year, going to be the year of production GenAI. What are some of the other things, maybe more specifically, or some examples that you've seen or that you guys are involved with, whether it's in healthcare or transportation or whatever, that you can say, wow, this is really amazing. This is some of the reason I came here. This is some of the magic I read in the book about early Apple days that's now coming to fruition in some of these other fields.
I am really looking forward to GenAI making individuals more productive. Because if you can start there, and by the way, the individuals could be consumers, right? If I was in the retail world, or if I wanted to go off and be Verizon or Best Buy or Priceline, whatever else it might be, I'm looking forward to GenAI with LLMs and with SLMs, right? Small language models with RAG, making it so much more productive for individuals to do things, right? It could be my email, it could be me going on travel, it could be me buying something on Best Buy, it could be any of those, or me talking about doing a bill problem, right? How frustrating is that? How do I make it easy? I think that part happens in the next 18 months. And I still think that's, by the way, Angry Birds plus plus, right? The really fun part I'm really looking forward to is another thing you said healthcare. How do I take 10 hours out of the doctor's times, right? They spend a lot of time reading charts, and it's like, give me the TLDR on what Chet's about, right? I've seen him for 18 years. Tell me what I should go and focus on. But if there are any anomalies that you see in the last 10 years, because he's been 18 years, he's coming to me for the same tests, like a physical. So just tell me what it is and let me go and take a look at it, right? Given how old he is, things like that. That's all great. What I'm really looking forward to is how does it fundamentally change my life, right? I'm talking about something more effective. Amazon, and I go back to Amazon or Uber, changed my life, like significantly changed my life. Like it was a step function change. Now I don't go to a store. I mean, and so how do you make, what is the Gen AI version of that? That part I don't know yet. And by the way, nor do all my colleagues who are building companies. They don't know that yet, right? So but you have to believe in the concept and go off and make it happen.
Right. I love that. We'll all get past Angry Birds. We can enjoy the Angry Birds while we're here, but we'll all get past Angry Birds. Well, Chet,
the one thing I would tell you though, Jeff, is it's the interesting thing about Gen AI. You can see how interested I am, how enthusiastic I am. It comes from a place of being a technologist. But guess what? If you're not, my only one request to you is lean into it. This is not going away. You have to lean into it because it's going to change your life, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Well, the last little concept I just want to close on, we didn't cover it earlier, but I used to ask people all the time, if storage, compute, and networking were free, what would you build? Right. And we're asymptotically approaching that every single day. But what this is enabling is this thing is called the Lost Einsteins concept, which is a paper that came out in 2018, which is if, some person in Africa, some young girl has the cure to cancer in her head, that if she only got access to the education and the resources that she would cure cancer, this now really starts to get to put the power again of that supercomputer for very little cost in the hands of anyone today with a mobile phone, tomorrow with a watch. I think that is so powerful.
I would agree. It's a great way to put it. The Lost Einsteins.
All right. Well, Chet, thanks again for sharing your perspective, your enthusiasm. I really appreciate the time.
It was great. I'm very glad you had me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Well, he's Chet. I'm Jeff. You're watching Work 20XX. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening on the podcast. We'll see you next time. Take care. Great.
Was that good?
Thank you. It was awesome.
Okay, great. That was fun.